People who have survived school shootings, what was it like? I was in the room when one student shot another at our high school then ran out of the building. This was the 80s, so there was no lockdown procedure. We all just left the building in various states of shock. I never felt threatened, so it really didn't affect me too badly. The victim lived, and the shooter spent several years in the Indiana Youth Center with Mike Tyson and one of my best friends from high school. That's a bizarre sentence for you. I was a sophomore at Millard South when it happened. It's bizarre to think it's almost been 10 years. My class had just been released from lunch to go back to class. We were heading towards the stairs when our teacher came racing around the corner and told us to run back to the room. We were in a code red. The rest of the afternoon was a weird blur. I was freaking out because me and my mom couldn't reach my sister, who ended up being too afraid to use her phone. Someone had been telling her cell messages would trigger a bomb if the shooter had set one up. From our classroom, we could see police cars piling in at the school's entrance, and our teacher was keeping a running commentary of what he saw. Once we realized we probably weren't in immediate danger, they let us out classroom by classroom once they'd done a sweep of the halls. The scariest fucking part of the day was a police officer basically kicking in our classroom door when it was our turn and pointing a gun in. With all the classrooms supposed to be locked for the code red, they'd assumed something was up in our room when ours wasn't. Scared the bejesus out of me. I could never quite still in that classroom again, despite having like 4 other classes in it before I graduated. I was at UCLA during the shooting in 2016. It was only a disgruntled grad student shooting his advisor and then himself, but we didn't know that at the time. Everyone was assuming it was a mass. I was walking back to my apartment just off campus when the notification went out that there were reports of gunshots and to get inside because campus was locking down. I finished walking home and turned on the news with some friends. I had other friends who were hiding in classrooms. The craziest part was the amount of misinformation going around on social media and in various group messages I was a part of. There were reports of more people shot and multiple shooters in a coordinated attack around various parts of campus and such. I'm not sure how much of that was fabricated maliciously and how much started with someone seeing a plainclothes officer with a gun or something and the story snowballing from there. I called my mom afterward and she started crying. She said she hadn't called me sooner because she didn't want my phone to ring in case I was in hiding. I was around for Elliot Rogers shooting at UCSB. There are a few things that I remember being surprising. The sense of humor. This was not everyone, but I remember a couple people making finger gun gestures at each other. I think this as because the event lasted a while and spread over the Isla Vista area, so there was a general discomfort wherever you were. I think people were coping with the stress however you could. Gallows humor, basically. The awkwardness of trying to console someone who just saw their friends shot or were shot at themselves. If you have ever been in a social situation where you didn't know what to say, add in the fact that whatever you say might permanently affect the life of the person you are talking to. Your school is now famous for this. Although this was during a time that school shootings weren't super common, so that might be changing. I hope I'm not too late to get buried here. I was a first responder to Sandy Hook. I was a volunteer paramedic that worked 30+ miles from the school, but was dispatched anyways regardless of the distance and response time, because we were up next once the local EMS crews were out of service. If I had to describe the scene, I'd say life-altering. I thought I had EMS stories to make your skin crawl before Sandy, but now, I can't even come close. The screams of parents and teachers and other students are still burned into my mind. The visual scene. I couldn't close my eyes for weeks without seeing bodies. My short answer? You technically survive the shooting, in my case, the aftermath, but I'll never be the same. I think of myself as my name 2.0. My name 1.0 was pre-Sandy and 2.0 is after. I'm a different person. I'm still in weekly therapy and haven't made any drastic moves towards getting better. Even just seeing this question brought my stomach up to my throat. It's a part of me I'll never be able to explain to anyone that wasn't there, and I don't tell anyone that didn't know 1.0 me because it's too much to put on anyone. My thoughts are with anyone that was involved in a school shooting brave enough to post here. Peace be with you all. Edit. You're all too kind. I'm in a group with the rest of the first responders from that day, and we work through everything together. I don't believe many of us, if any, are still actively volunteering in EMS as a result of this. Also, I'm a lady. I was a student at Virginia Tech during the 2007 massacre. I wasn't directly in the fire or anything, just a student in the dorms. It was very surreal. That morning my friends and I sat in the dorms watching the news evolve on campus. It started off saying 1 or 2 injured. At that point we didn't make too much of the situation. I remember the newscaster saying at one point that the new updates was over 20 fatalities, the final count was 32, and we all just froze. We assumed it was in error. It was not. As the day evolved we reached out to our friends to make sure they were okay, but cell service was very spotty. I had a very uneasy feeling that a somewhat peripheral friend of mine was in danger and tried to text her. It turns out she was shot, but survived. Another of our friends was shot and killed. The next few days were strange. Classes were cancelled and many left the campus. President Bush came to speak to us, but I'm sure even he felt helpless with not much to contribute. Eventually, they cancelled the remainder of classes and exams for the semester, and we left for the year. The summer was difficult. At my summer job people kept trying to talk to me about the shooting, both coworkers and customers. I don't know why, but I felt okay discussing it with fellow VT students but nobody else, including my other friends and family. I eventually quit that job and got a new one, not telling anyone I was a VT student. Returning to school felt surreal. We did a lot of school spirit activities at football games, we are Virginia Tech, etc. But it was definitely a different atmosphere. I felt very uncomfortable in lecture halls, and whenever my mind went blank I imagined a shooter coming in and killing us. That feeling still persists sometimes. In large groups I'll start thinking about a mass murder occurring. That day, I'll always say, is the day I grew from a child to adult. I changed in ways both positive and negative. I made new bonds with my fellow classmates, but felt isolated from some other people. It was definitely the defining experience of my young adulthood. For a long time, I didn't want to talk about these experiences with anyone. Now, I try and speak more openly about it, because I'm trying to advocate for a better future. Fellow Hokie here. I was a senior in HS when the shooting occurred, so the following fall was my first semester there. In my very first class on the very first day, I was in a large 200-ish person chemistry class, the big lecture hall and the chemical/phys building for those familiar. The professor started the class with an emotional and powerful talk. He mentioned that a few weeks before the shooting happened, he was teaching in this same large classroom we were in, when a random student entered the classroom during the middle of a lecture, looked around, and walked back out. That event was odd, because normally students aren't lost in the middle of the semester, but the professor brushed it off, and continued the lesson. A few weeks later, the shooting happened, and once the shooter was identified, the professor recognized him as the student who entered the room and surveyed it before walking out, possibly scoping it out as a potential spot for the attack. The shooter was an English major at the time, so being in a chemistry and physics building was not normal. For the remaining 4 years at Virginia Tech, whenever a class got interrupted by someone walking into room, my heart sank thinking we were about to get attacked. Those same thoughts persisted for a couple years after graduation and once I started working, and we had people accidentally walking into meeting rooms at work. Survivor of the SHS shooting here. I was 9 at the time, and in 4th grade. I was in the gym, and we were just going through the normal routine. That is the gym teacher explaining the activity and us participating. I remember it was rope climbing that day, and I was so excited. All of a sudden we heard a loud bang noise, and everyone looked towards the door. At first we shrugged it off as the janitor dropping something in the hallway, but after the second and third bangs we were ushered into the corner, and told to be very quiet, while my teacher ran, and locked the doors. We were confused but unbothered at first, but the longer it went on the more worried we became. The loudspeaker crackled on, and we heard muffled voices and muffled bangs, then silence. Years later I was told it was our principal and the office staff trying to warn us, but were killed. By now we're all silently sobbing and holding hands. I remember being very scared, but not entirely sure of what. Of course, a school shooting was not the first thing on our minds. Eventually my teacher told us to crawl across the floor and into a supply closet, where we sat terrified until SWAT and police officers opened the doors and helped us out. We went out one of the back doors and walked the drive to the firehouse, where our parents picked us up and took us home. That experience has changed me forever, and while the effects I had initially, nightmares, anxiety, etc., have lessened, I still feel them. I and many others suffer from PTSD, and I don't think a day goes by where I don't think about it. While I did not know everyone who passed personally, I have seen the toll it took on my community and feel for their families and friends deeply. RIP angels, you are loved.